لله الحمد لله الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض ولم يتخذ ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك وخلق كل شيء فقدره تقديرا يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا ونذيرا وداعيا إلى الله بإذنه وسراجا منيرا وبشر المؤمنين بأن لهم من الله فضلا كبيرا ولا تطع الكافرين والمنافقين ودع أذاهم وتوكل على الله وكفى بالله وكيلا وتوكل على الحي الذي لا يموت وتوكل على العزيز الرحيم الذي يراك حين تقوم وتقلبك في الساجدين إنه هو السميع العليم. الصلاة والسلام على الأشرف الأنبياء إمام المرسلين خاتم النبيين بالقاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيتي الطيبين الطاهرين. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات صل على محمد وآل محمد. All praise, glory and thanks belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has made this gathering possible today. And it is through this gathering and dhikr of Allah that we invoke Him to guide us all onto the straight path, His path, the Sirat al-Mustaqim, the path of those whom He favored with the true message of Allah, and those who joined that path, and not to be of those in whom His anger and displeasure was invoked, neither those who strayed from the Sirat al-Mustaqim. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. آمين يا رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum. Jummah Mubarak to all. I want to welcome Jubi into our gathering today. He's from Toronto. He's one of my very good friends from childhood. So he has joined us today. Welcome. And also Amin, welcome back. And Mahdi, of course, welcome back. Pleasure to have you today. I want to go over, to start off this khutbah, a concept which is mentioned in Surah Ar-Rum, which is called fitra. Okay? Does anybody have an idea of what fitra means? In Surah Ar-Rum, the context in which fitra is described is that He has prescribed for us the deen, the religion, in which we have a pure worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah has claimed that each human being is disposed. So fitra means a natural inclination towards something. So a human being, the way that we have been programmed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have a natural inclination to many things. And the one in Surah Ar-Rum that Allah describes is this natural inclination towards a pure worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and connecting to Him in a pure manner. Now we can also elaborate on that and say that a human being has natural inclinations to many things. One of which is the truth, for example. Certain ultimate truths which are described throughout the Quran, a natural instinction or inclination for the human being is to gravitate towards that truth. And likewise, in contrast, whenever something of a false nature is mentioned, and the word in the Quran for that is batil, there's a sort of a red flag or an alert system that goes on in the body that, you know what, this doesn't sound right. I gotta stay away from this, or I gotta reject it. So in our deen, we are strengthening that fitrah towards goodness, and we are actually staying away from that fitrah of the things that put up red flags, in our system of senses. So one of the examples of that is nafsan lawama. There's a nafsan amara is this inclination towards just satisfying your basic needs, your carnal needs of the human soul. And nafsan lawama is, in its definition in Arabic, is the reproaching soul. So as soon as one commits a transgression against their own souls, there's this red flag, sort of something happening in the body that's saying, I don't feel good, like I haven't done something right. And so we turn back and we ask for forgiveness. But the topic of fitrah can be elaborated much more in detail. But the reason I brought up fitrah to start this khutbah, and I won't take more than 2 minutes of your time to explain this, is that all of you here, we have a lot of brilliant minds, open-minded people, and that's why a lot of people here are successful the way that they are. And so if I'm saying something here which resonates with you and is truthful, you should be accepting it. And further in that, you should be reciting the Quran yourself, so you don't just accept anything that I say up here. And likewise, if something triggers a red flag in you, I truly ask you to hold me accountable to that. And we can have a courteous discussion about it if I've said certain things which have raised a red flag in your senses. Okay, so salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So the verse that I quoted at the beginning of this khutbah, and prior to me going into this verse, to recap what we spoke about last week, I want to just go through an analogy with you guys, okay? And I want you to imagine that you go to sleep one night. And when you wake up in the morning, you find yourself on a train, okay? What are the natural questions that each and every one of us are going to ask? If we sleep in our bed tonight, and tomorrow we wake up on a train that's traveling somewhere, and we don't know where it's going, what are some of the questions we may ask? Perfect. How did I get here? What else?
Where are we going?
Where are we going? Okay. What else? Okay. But those two questions are fundamental. So you guys have probably assumed this train is an analogy right now that I'm using for the life of this world. Okay. We came into existence, and prior to us coming into existence, in Surah Insan it says that, hasn't there come a time for a human being where he wasn't even a thing mentioned? And we came into existence and we don't know how we got here. Where are we going? Where is this train heading? We don't know. What is the purpose of this journey that we're on? We don't know, And so the Quran and the word of Allah seeks to answer each of these questions to give us a certainty and a clarity as to where we're heading towards. And last week we talked about death and how we flee from the certainty of death. The concept of death is something that we're not coming face to face with. So if you can imagine on this train, there's people exiting, and you don't know where they're exiting because you can't even see outside the train where we've stopped. And they're exiting, and you're going on this train and you're seeing people exit and you're seeing people enter. And no one is there to really explain to you where they're exiting to and when this train is going to come to a complete stop. So the Quran offers us that. And it offers us that certainty so we can have faith, we can have hope, and we can be in a state of assurance that when we do get off this train, that it's going to be something of goodness and something that we can look forward to. Okay, so that's the wrap-up of the discussion that we were having last week about certain truths that Allah seeks to clarify for us in the Quran. And even on this train, you have certain people that are, let's say, a band listening to music or certain distractions, but we're suppressing these questions because they're so difficult to answer. And throughout our life, we're looking for distractions on this train so we can take our mind off of the fact that we are going to exit one day on a stop. And so Allah seeks for us to limit those distractions, to enjoy our share of the world, but to also keep our focus on the fact that we are going to leave this train and we are heading towards something else. So the verse that I quoted at the beginning of this khutbah is from Surah Ahzab. I believe it's verse 21, I may be mistaken. But it says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ Assalamu alaikum. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أَسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرَ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. There certainly come to you an exemplar, like a good example, aswatun hasanatun, an excellent example for those in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. There certainly come to all of us an excellent example in the Prophet for those of you who seek Allah, and for those of you who are looking forward to the day of judgment, Yawm al-Akhir, the last day, and for those of us who want to remember Allah frequently. Okay, so the Rasulullah has many examples, and we can go over all the things that he's done and the excellent example that he is, but I want to focus on one example throughout this khutbah, and that's the example and the example of gentleness, kindness, compassionateness, merciful, and that is described in Surah Al-Ali Imran. Okay, in Surah Al-Ali Imran, verse 159, Allah states, I'm going to read the English part. It is by Allah's mercy that you, O Muhammad, are gentle to them. Had you been harsh and hard-hearted, they would have surely ran away from you. They'd be scattered, flee away from you. So excuse them and plead for forgiveness for them and consult them in their affairs. And once you have made a decision, put your trust in Allah. Indeed, Allah loves those who trust Him. So this concept of gentleness, Allah is describing it in such a way that Rasulullah, when he was dealing with the people, had he been harsh, because he knew things that they did not know. As we know that early in his prophethood, Allah ascended him towards the heavens in what we call Mi'raj, where he went through the 7 heavens up until the Arsh of Allah, and he saw the truth. All the things that we are, trying to clarify in our life, Rasulullah had already seen all of it. Allah had shown him the greatest signs. And then he sent him back to the dunya. So imagine you've seen everything, you're in a dark room and everything's illuminated and you know exactly what's in the room, but everyone else doesn't know. And you're trying to explain to them that, this is here, that's there. And sometimes frustration can take over. Sometimes a lack of patience can take over. So what Allah is prescribing Rasulullah in this verse is that it is by Allah's mercy that you are gentle to them. Allah has blessed you with the fact that you speak to them in a gentle, patient way so that they can see the light. And one more important thing, had you been harsh and hard-hearted, they would have surely scattered and ran away from you. So how can we connect to this in a practical way in our lives, we have families, we have kids, we have businesses. And in order for us to reach a success in all these things, Allah is telling us at the same time, be gentle. I remember when I was raised in Pakistan and the teacher that taught me Quran was coming, I used to run away because he used to come with an angry look on his face and the harsh guy with the topi and so we can all relate to that whenever something is harsh, it's not in our fitrah. I'll go back to fitrah. It's not in our natural inclination, the way that we're programmed, to be receptive to harshness. In fact, we're very receptive to gentleness and patience and compassion and understanding. And that's also the way that Allah teaches us throughout this Quran. So we can apply this so many ways in our life. If we want people to understand what we understand, or for them to see a perspective that perhaps they haven't seen, we have to approach it with an idea of gentleness and compassion. And when I watch YouTube, sometimes I'm seeing these debates online between Shias and Sunnis, or Muslims and Christians, and Muslims and Sikhs, and I just see people satisfying their own ego. If truly we were looking to share something good with the world, we wouldn't have to be harsh. And people turn to harsh words and condescending, tones, and this is not the way to share something beautiful with the world. If you truly have the truth with you, harshness is not necessary, and gentleness and compassion comes in naturally. So I want to also take you to one other example in the Quran. And it's funny, Allah mentioned there's a great example for you in the Prophet, and by extension we also believe in his family, the Ahlul Bayt. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And as well as that, also the example the Quran has given of other prophets. So I want to take you to Surah Taha, where Nabi Musa is called to the fire, and he is shown the greatest signs of Allah. Then Allah has a discourse with him that you have to go to Fir'aun to challenge him and invite him to the faith, the true faith of Allah. So hopefully he can reform. So Nabi Musa is going not to fight Fir'aun. He's going to try to reform him, to put light in a dark room for him. So this is very important. So before he goes, Allah gives him advice in Surah Taha. And he says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ اذْهَبَا إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ إِنَّهُ طَغَى فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا لَعَلَّهُ يَتَذَكَّرُ أَوْ يَخْشَى. Both of you, Fir'aun and Nabi Musa and Nabi Harun, go to Pharaoh, for he has indeed rebelled. Speak to him in a soft manner. فَقُولُوا لَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Maybe he will take admonition or fear. Maybe he'll be humbled and maybe he'll remember. So think about it. Fir'aun, there's nobody in the world that exists right now that we know of that can compete with Fir'aun and what he did. He is the depiction of darkness, evil, the archetype basically in the Quran of that. And Nabi Musa is being sent to reform him. Allah could have easily said, be angry, be harsh, get him to come, to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what did he say? He said, فَقُولَا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا. Speak to him in a soft manner. So again, this idea of gentleness. It's almost like we're speaking a language, but the moment we get harsh, the other person turns deaf. Like we're saying words, but it's not being received. But the moment we turn gentle and we add a little bit of compassion to our speech, it's more likely to enter people's hearts, you know? And hopefully we can have reform in that way. And so when, you know, when we were kids, we get taught in a way of fear and harshness. And it didn't work for me. I don't know about you guys. But it kind of took me further away from Islam because that wasn't the way that it should have been done. But when we actually start reciting the Book of Allah, we realize that His invitation is never through fear. It's never through harshness. It's always through using the faculty of reason, logic, and appealing to our heart. You know, appealing to our ability to have compassion. Because Allah knows us better than anybody else because He's created us. And He's told us that our fitrah is towards kindness. You know, it's inclination towards good speech. So, and this is a thing not easy to do, it says in the Quran. You know, there's another verse in Surah Fussilat, it says, بَعْدَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. Who has a better call than him who invites to Allah and acts righteously and says, indeed I am one of the Muslims. Good and evil conduct are not equal. Repel evil with that which is best. Ahsanu. If you do so, he between whom yourself and the other person was enmity, they will become to you a sympathetic friend. But none is granted it except those who are patient, and none is granted it except the one who is greatly endowed. So this is a thing that is not easy to attain, but it says in the Quran, Surah Fussilat, that if you have somebody and there's an enmity between you and him, Allah is giving the advice that repel that enmity with what is best, you know? And if you do so between you and whom there was enmity, it's like he'll become a dear friend to you. What a beautiful advice, right, in the Quran. So the Quran is filled with these gems of wisdom that we can apply to our daily life and hopefully we can learn from. And we can strive towards attaining these things. Salawat. Sorry. Lastly, before I wrap up, I just want to go over the example of alcohol in the Quran. And from this example, inshallah, we can all learn that things don't happen with a snap of a finger. Everything that's good, or if we want to repel something that's bad from us, it's a process. So the Quran was sent in 2 stages. It was sent throughout a 23-year period, but it's divided into 2 stages of Makkan surahs and Madani surahs. Makkan surahs was coming to the people of Arabia who were in darknesses, who were in a state of jahiliyah, heedlessness, ignorance, and it was calling them towards the right path, the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to complete submission to Allah. And the Madani surahs were when they had established a state, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could go into more detail as to the laws prescribed to them so they can finally have the perfect deen ready for them. So if we look at Surah Nahl, okay, Surah Nahl is the bee. And in that portion where the bee is described and honey is described, it talks over a lot of blessings. And you know, in ayah 66, we went over laban and khalis. Do you remember that? The pure milk? So right after that ayah, number 67, Allah talks about this. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. To keep in mind, if you look at the context of Surah Nahl, it's talking about the blessings of Allah in this segment, okay, of Surah Nahl. From the fruits of date palms and vines, you draw wine and goodly provision. The word here is used, sakrata. You draw intoxication from the date palms. And it's referred to it as a good thing. And most people won't tell you this. It's kind of like brushed aside. But I'm going to tell you, okay? In Surah Nahl, wine is referred to as a blessing. Think about that. Intoxicants are referred to a blessing in Surah Nahl. Surah Nahl is what? A Makki surah. Early. Okay? There are indeed signs in that for a people who exercise their reason. What? For us, someone who drinks alcohol is destined toward hell, right? Think about this for a second, okay? Shirk is always prohibited. From day one, when the first surah is revealed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, associating partners with God, zina, killing an innocent soul, these things are completely forbidden. There's no transition going on in the Quran. But with alcohol, there is. In Surah Nahl, it's referred to as a blessing. Okay? In Surah Baqarah, which is a Madani surah, an early Madani surah, in Surah Nisa, which is an early Madani surah, it talks about alcohol again. O you who have faith, do not approach prayer when you are intoxicated, not until you know what you are saying, nor enter the mosque in a state of ritual impurity until you have washed yourselves, except while passing through. So now it's getting a bit more specific. You see how gentle Allah is? He sees that someone, let's say if we find an alcoholic in the world right now, we cannot just shun them and be like, you're destined toward hell. No, there's a gentleness that comes. Allah, it took him four surahs to completely ban alcohol. There was a transition going on. At first, it was referred to as a blessing. Secondly, in Surah Nisa, it's saying, now do not approach the prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying. So he's getting a bit more firmer that, hey, you know what, this is bad for you. There's a process going on here. Then in Surah Baqarah, they ask you concerning wine and gambling. Say to them, there's a great sin in both of them and some profits for the people. But their sinfulness outweighs their profit. Okay, and that's the ending of the talking about alcohol in this verse. So now it's acknowledging the fact there's benefits in them. Like it says in Surah Nahl, you draw intoxicants. But the sin of it is far greater. Avoid it. You see the transition happening here? Blessing, don't approach prayer while intoxicated. Now, I'm using logic. There are benefits and there are drawbacks, but the drawbacks are much greater. Stay away from it. And lastly, in Surah Ma'idah, which many scholars have considered one of the last surahs to be revealed in the Quran, along with Surah Fath, it is said that, O you who have faith, indeed wine, gambling, idols, and the divining arrows are abominations of Satan's doing. So avoid them, so that you may be felicitous. This was the last surah. Now, completely avoidance. That's haram now. Okay, so why did I use this example? Because we're talking about the concept of being gentle with the people. When you invite to them, you can't just, in a snap of a finger, expect them to do a 180. And Allah is the same way. With wine, it was a prominent thing in Arabia at that time. If we look at people who are not Muslims, it's a prominent. If we live in Costa Rica, drinking is part of their culture. In Canada, drinking is part of the culture. So even there's a great problem in the community of our Muslim brothers and sisters who are drinking. How do we approach them? How did the Quran approach the people who are drinking every day? We've got to ask these questions. It did it in a course of an elongated period, over 23 years, to take away alcohol from the people. And that shows the compassion and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how He's so gentle with us at every step of the way. And only Allah can provide that for us. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Does anybody know who Pascal Blaine is here? Pascal Blaine. He existed in the 17th century. He was a philosopher and a mathematician. First a mathematician, usually you find this trend in history that whoever has been a great mathematician ends up being a philosopher. And he was a devout Christian, and later on in his life, he made it his goal to invite to God, to invite to the truth. And as we know, math is a science in which logic is required, a lot of logic. There's not two right answers, there's only one right answer. It's a very binary science, and a logical science that leads to two ends. And so he had this claim, it's called Pascal's wager. Has anybody heard of this thing, Pascal's wager? When he was talking to the people who didn't believe in God, he made a bet with them, basically a wager. He says, if you're right, all that I have to sacrifice, like if God doesn't exist, imagine if, this world comes in existence by fluke and we pass away and there's nothing that happens after the world. He says, if you're right and there's no God, what have I lost? The temporary pleasures of the soul, and temporary luxuries, which were just here for a brief moment of time, which are going to leave us anyways when we step off this train. But if I'm right, you have a lot more to lose, because you're going to lose infinite mercy, and you're going to be in a place of torment for an infinite time. So he used logic to invite people to God. And he said that, even if God doesn't exist, my belief in God is reforming me in this world as well. It says in the Quran that if you follow your base desires, you're bound to perish. If I don't have God as a compass, if I don't have the Quran as a compass as to what I can and cannot do, I'm going to follow my desires. That's going to become my God. And if we follow our desires, what happens? A lot of people go into depression. You look at famous artists and musicians, right? There's so many suicides, there's so many people on antidepressants because they're following their desires. So what Pascal's wager was, even if God doesn't exist, in this world I'm benefiting from it. I'm living a better life. My life with my family is better. There's a blessing that's coming in my work. There's a blessing that's coming in my relationships. So I'm winning in this life, and if he does exist, I'm going to win in the other life, and you're going to have eternal damnation. So logically, it just makes perfect sense, because it's a win-win situation versus a lose-lose situation. So that's how he invited to the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we look at the Quran, that is exactly how it does it, Logic is, again, a fitra of the human being. It's an inclination. We go towards stuff that makes sense. And we repel things which are bogus, which are rubbish. Like if A plus B doesn't equal C, we're going to be like, that doesn't make sense, I'm talking about the A squared plus B squared equal C squared, the Pythagoras theorem, yeah. But this is the Quran, it invites through gentleness, through compassion, and also through logic and reasoning. And it's not a coincidence that throughout the Quran, the verse that is used is أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ comes from the root word aql. And aql in Arabic means the ability to reason, and the ability to have intellect, and the ability to have logic. And verse after verse in the Quran, there is an ending saying, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Don't you exercise your reason? Don't you exercise this intellect? Don't you exercise this logic? And so Pascal Blaine did exactly that. And he was very successful. He invited a lot of people to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can take a lesson from him as well. I want to take this moment to make a group prayer, because I truly believe in the power of prayer, but in numbers as well. For primarily our friend Juby here, he's going to go see a doctor right now at 2 p.m. He's having some difficulties with his health. And for all the people who are suffering, physical illnesses of the body, mental illnesses of the mind, and most importantly, spiritual illnesses of the soul, may Juby and all of them, get a speedy recovery. May God bless you with a recovery, and may God bless each and every one of us. And he's a man of strong character. I was talking to him today. He's like, I have full belief in God's will. Whatever happens is going to be for the best, and that's why we say Alhamdulillah. And our Sikh brother here is embodying that. Alhamdulillah, all praise belongs to Allah, whether it's a good thing right now for the moment or a bad thing. Like there is good in everything. So may Allah bless you with a quick recovery, and everyone who's suffering of illnesses. Adwa shifa mareez, please. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Amman yujibul muttarra idha da'ahu wa yakhshifu as-su'. أَمَّن يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. صلوات الله.